Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this webinar on the HeadStart solution for the NHS. My name is Greg Nottage, and I'm a Windows 10 consultant for Microsoft, working with the NHS on their journey to adopt Windows 10. Please note, this webinar is intended for people who have an understanding of managing Windows using Active Directory, Group Policy, and System Center Configuration Manager. First of all, let's have a look through our agenda. We'll discuss the background to the NHS's adoption of Windows 10. Then we'll explain where the HeadStart solution fits in. Finally, we'll explain how you can get started with HeadStart and what it has to offer. Microsoft is actively engaged with the NHS to help modernise its desktop computing environment. A key component of this modernisation is the deployment of Windows 10 to replace ageing legacy operating systems. Windows 10 provides numerous security improvements over previous operating system versions. The semi-annual channel version is updated regularly under a lifecycle known as Evergreen, with new operating systems versions known as feature updates now being delivered every 6 months. This allows Microsoft to introduce smaller incremental changes whilst minimizing user disruption compared with previous OS versions. It means we're able to react faster to emerging trends and threats, closing the gap that attackers can exploit, and bring to market many more features in the same time as it would have historically taken us to release just one new OS. Also, as you may know, with each new release of Windows 10, the National Cyber Security Centre, or NCSC, publish a set of recommended security guidelines that UK public sector organisations such as the NHS should adhere to when configuring Windows 10. However, the implementation of these security features comes with an overhead that is typical with the introduction of any new capabilities into your environment. Coupled with the changes to the release cadence of Windows, we recognise that this can pose adoption challenges to UK public sector organisations who are well known to be risk averse. In an effort to assist with these adoption challenges and accelerate your Windows 10 deployments, Microsoft has developed a solution known as HeadStart. So what is HeadStart? A HeadStart toolkit consists of a System Center Configuration Manager, or SCCM, task sequence template, some packages for deployment with this task sequence, a set of group policy or GPO exports, and some accompanying documentation detailing how to implement the solution. HeadStart has been designed to help organisations accelerate the creation of their own 64-bit Windows 10 enterprise image, which is aligned to NCSC guidelines. The resulting image is owned and supported by the NHS organisations who implement it, not Microsoft or NHS Digital, and can be used as a start point for securing your organisation to the government security classification level of official. HeadStart is currently available to NHS organisations for free through the custom support agreement between Microsoft and NHS Digital. It's worth mentioning that this contract expires on the 28th of December 2018. However, organisations may continue to use HeadStart beyond this date, but updates to the toolkit will no longer be provided. NHS organisations may wish to share the toolkit with their Windows 10 deployment partner, although in this scenario, the toolkit can only be used for the express purpose of deploying Windows 10 at the particular organisation in question. The toolkit currently supports the Microsoft Security Baseline for Windows 10 version 1803, with NCSC settings currently baselined at Windows 10 version 1709. The group policies are based on the Microsoft Security Baselines, with the additional NCSC settings added on top. Work is currently underway to release the Windows 10 1803 NCSC settings, and these should be available shortly. To gain access to the toolkit, please email windows10@nhs.net, who will register your request and provide access to the materials. Next, download the content and read the how-to guide for instructions on how to set up HeadStart. We've outlined the high-level steps here. First, import the GPOs on a domain controller using the provided PowerShell script. Then manually import the SCCM task sequence. This does not contain the required dependencies, so when you edit the task sequence inside the SCCM console, you will initially see it showing some missing content. These are pieces you need to set up in your SCCM environment and then reassociate with the appropriate steps inside the task sequence. There are some components that we can provide and some that we cannot due to licensing restrictions on provision of software. We've included placeholders for this content inside the HeadStart materials that you download, and the documentation explains what is required to set this up. You will also need to remediate certain steps in the task sequence to reflect your environment, such as the domain join step. Finally, set up a test collection inside SCCM containing some computers that you obviously don't mind being wiped, and then deploy the task sequence to these computers to test that everything deploys successfully. Please ensure you test everything thoroughly before broadly deploying to your estate. Before showing more detail on the HeadStart GPOs, we first wanted to have a quick recap on what GPOs actually are. GPOs are configuration items that can be centrally set on your devices when those devices are joined to your Active Directory. These are then reapplied every time your devices reboot and are used as a way to enforce your enterprise configuration across those devices. GPOs are a mature technology that have been around for many years, and as a result there are numerous settings that can be applied, over 5,000 at last count I believe. Because the number of items is so vast, in an effort to speed up the implementation and provide a known good security start point, Microsoft releases security baselines with each new version of Windows 10. These can be downloaded from our website. These baselines have been engineered to balance security with functionality, but the UK National Cybersecurity Centre provide a set of additional recommendations over and above the Microsoft security baselines to further secure devices to the official government security level. This is where the HeadStart GPO exports come from. They are based on the Microsoft security baselines, but with the NCSC recommendations added on top. As you may know, when it comes to configuring GPOs, Microsoft recommend a layered approach. So it's not recommended to edit the default GPOs that are part of your AD, and likewise we don't recommend editing the HeadStart or Microsoft security baseline GPOs. It's better to create additional Delta GPOs that adjust things for your environment. The way to do this is explained by looking at the table shown at the bottom of this slide. So the order of GPOs affects how the policies or configuration settings are applied. Essentially, the lower the number in the precedence column, the higher the priority of the GPO. So looking at the example in the table, working from the bottom up, the default domain policy applies first, then the Microsoft OneDrive policy, then the NCSC policy, and finally the customer Delta policy applies on top, which overrides the settings defined in the lower priority GPOs. So the example used here is related to OneDrive. The Microsoft policies have nothing defined for OneDrive, but the NCSC policies disable it. Since you may want that enabled in your environment, modifying the setting in the customer Delta policies is the way to achieve it. So looking at the list here, the top policy in that list wins, meaning that is what will take effect on the end user devices and configure OneDrive to be enabled. So as mentioned, by using these customer Delta policies, you can make changes to the Microsoft and NCSC policies without needing to edit those policies directly. To further illustrate the GPO concepts we discussed on the previous slide, what's shown here is an example of the HeadStart GPOs you'll see in your environment after you run the import script. The main reason for using this import script is that there are quite a few policies to import, and they have been prepared to work in the order as shown here. The import script will correctly set up the ordering for you, making it much easier to then copy this configuration to other OUs in your environment should you wish. It's also important not to adjust the order of these GPOs, as they have been specially prepared to work in this specific sequence, and you may get unexpected behavior if you change that. When you open the Group Policy Management console and browse to the organisational unit that has the HeadStart GPOs applied, you will see the policies linked in the order as shown on this slide. As mentioned, the GPOs apply in order of precedence, as shown by that far left column. So the higher the precedence, the more important that policy is considered. This means any policy settings that are configured in the GPOs that you have at the top of this list override any policy settings that are configured in the GPOs that are lower down that list. Here we wanted to provide a slightly different view of the HeadStart GPOs after you've successfully imported them. By default, the import script will create a new top-level Active Directory Organisational Unit, OU, called EUDSG, and two sub-OUs under it, one for devices and one for users, with the appropriate policies targeted accordingly. It's also worth pointing out that, by default, the import script will not overwrite any existing policies unless you enable the overwrite option. You will notice quite a few policies there. The naming convention is as follows. Policies starting with MSFT in their name are the Microsoft Security Baseline policies. Policies starting with NCSC are the policies defined by the National Cybersecurity Centre according to their end-user device security guidance. Policies starting with REF are used to denote example settings that have been used previously in other enterprise environments to speed up adoption of these additional capabilities in your organisation. You will also notice policies with the word customer in triangular brackets. These customer GPOs are empty placeholder templates that you can edit or adjust to override any of the HeadStart GPO settings. They are there for you to use as Delta policies. So as mentioned before, the recommendation is not to edit the HeadStart template GPOs, rather edit these customer Delta GPOs. Since these customer Delta GPOs are higher in the priority ordering, they will override the HeadStart GPOs with any changes you require. Not editing the HeadStart GPOs directly makes it easier to see what was changed in your environment, and it also helps when you need to update to a new set of HeadStart GPOs later. You can just switch out the HeadStart templates themselves without affecting the changes you implemented in your Delta policies. Another item to mention is that whilst this slide shows the Delta policies with the word customer wrapped in triangular brackets, one of the parameters of the import script allows you to supply your own organisation name to replace that customer string. So when you run the import script with this parameter, the GPOs you see listed there with customer in triangular brackets will be shown with the organisation name you supply instead. Before we go into more detail about the HeadStart SCCM task sequence, we just wanted to mention about the SCCM versions that are required to support the latest Windows 10 versions. As shown here, the minimum required version of SCCM that supports Windows 10 1803 is the 1802 version of SCCM, but it's always recommended to upgrade to the latest SCCM version, as that brings many additional enhancements. It's also worth mentioning that SCCM is regularly updated 3 times per year, in line with the Windows as a Service evergreen lifecycle. So if you're using SCCM to manage Windows 10, by definition that means you also need to keep SCCM updated in line with your Windows 10 versions. This slide shows a screenshot of the task sequence. This is a customized version of an MDT integrated SCCM task sequence. So by nature, it implies that you have the latest MDT version installed and integrated into your SCCM environment. And your SCCM environment should also be running the current branch version, the most recent version of which is currently 1806. Stepping through the task sequence, first it formats the disk and enables BitLocker using pre-provisioning. Next it applies the OSWIM and reboots to run the UBI mini setup experience. Then it completes a few configuration items and installs. It installs things like the LAPS client, which is the local administrator password solution for setting unique passwords for local admin accounts and handling rotation of those passwords. Then it installs the latest patched MBAM client, which is the Microsoft BitLocker administration and monitoring solution for BitLocker management if you're using MBAM. It enables the Hyper-V and App-V features of the OS, and then applies some customizations to remove certain inbox packages, the usual suspects like games, consumer features, and the Xbox packages, which have no place in an enterprise environment. Finally, it applies a custom start menu and taskbar layout to show only enterprise-related icons there. As previously mentioned, you will need to repopulate some of the steps in this task sequence after it's first imported into your SCCM environment. But once you've done the initial prep work, what you'll end up with is an SCCM operating system deployment for Windows 10 that takes a lot of the hard work out of it. The next slide, or the next couple of slides, highlight some additional information around things to focus on when setting up the HeadStart GPOs in your environment. Based on the NCSC recommended guidelines, the HeadStart GPOs include app locker policies for application whitelisting. So this is a way of locking down what standard users can run or execute on their computers. It isn't configured for admin users, but that's mainly because it's a trivial matter for an admin user to disable the app locker service on the device, so there's little point enabling it for admin users. The use of app locker does imply that you've thoroughly tested it before fully implementing it, as due to the nature of what it does, it's likely to block things that you'll want to enable. So it's recommended to enable it in audit mode first and operate the computer normally for a while, allowing the relevant entries to be captured in the event log. This is where it's recommended to work with your test users, IT champions as we refer to them in the NHS Windows 10 guides, and have them help to generate the relevant event log entries, allowing you to develop policies suitable for your environment before you fully enable AppLocker. More information and a recommended AppLocker strategy can be found by visiting the Aaron Locker link on this slide. This takes you to a site that is maintained by one of our esteemed Microsoft security colleagues, Aaron Margosis, and there he documents a way of using PowerShell to enumerate the AppLocker event log entries and automatically convert them into AppLocker policies. So that reduces a lot of the work and is well worth a look. Some of the other policies included in the HeadStart solution cover things like exploit guard and office policies. Exploit guard is a new set of host intrusion prevention capabilities for Windows 10, allowing you to manage and reduce the attack surface of apps used by your employees. These are designed to mitigate attacks whilst trying to balance that against normal user behaviours. An example here would be an Office macro that immediately tried to download some content from the internet. This is not typical of normal user activity, but very typical of malware trying to download a malicious payload. So it's these types of behaviours that the exploit guard policies prevent. One of the other concepts used in the HeadStart GPOs is known as the managed tunnel firewall concept. This uses the Windows 10 client firewall to restrict network traffic and prevent common vulnerabilities from being exploited. Once again, it does imply that you test things thoroughly before adopting these policies, but it's highly recommended that you do and don't just disable the firewall. It serves as yet another way of mitigating common attack vectors, such as credential theft attacks like pass the hash or pass the ticket. So well worth the effort to get these set up. We just wanted to finish up with a few recommendations from the field. Firstly, as mentioned before, don't modify the standard HeadStart GPOs. Make any required amendments using the Delta GPOs. Another important point regarding GPOs, obviously they've been around a long time, and it's likely you'll have a significant legacy of technical debt around GPOs in your estate, as everybody does. What's important is to take a step back from this with your Windows 10 adoption and think carefully before bringing this legacy stuff forward. It's not recommended just to take the attitude that we're continuing with this because it's what we've always done. You really need to look at what you're doing and ask yourself this: is there a true business requirement for this setting? If no one can answer that, then scrap it and don't pollute your Windows 10 deployments with this legacy stuff. It's likely that these will have a negative impact on your Windows 10 environment, as many of the legacy behaviors will at best impair Windows 10 and at worst potentially break it. The OS now includes many changes that legacy GPOs will interfere with. So the strategy we are recommending is to start from the HeadStart GPOs, test those and only bring through legacy GPOs if you can truly justify their existence. Otherwise, just stick with what's in the HeadStart pack. They've been designed to balance security with the functionality that is correct for a modern Windows 10 environment. And bringing legacy GPOs into this mix will most likely cause you more problems than it solves. Another thing to mention is around the modification of the firewall rules. Try to limit your adjustments according to the recommendations listed here. So make sure you're careful about what you allow through the firewall and where that traffic is allowed to get to. In other words, try to keep things as restricted as possible. So that covers what I wanted to talk about today. Are there any questions at this point?
Yes, we're getting a few through, so I'll just fire a couple at you if that's okay.
Sure thing, thanks John.
Where can we find the presentation once this is finished? I'll answer that because I think I've just posted something similar. This will be made available post the event. It is being recorded, and we'll also provide the Q&As as well. At the moment, it will probably be contact NHS Digital at Windows 10 at nhs.net, and they'll be able to point you to the direction of the webinar. Moving on, is it possible to get a copy of the presentation to run with my IT internally? Yes, we will make the presentation available along with the on-demand content as well. So yes, we will make that available to you. Question here on what is the full Aaron Locker URL, please?
Let me quickly
we'll provide as part of the pack that when we release it.
Yes.
Okay, so we'll do that following the events in the Q&A section, if that's okay. Oh, sorry, I believe it might have been put up there. I'll just broadcast that. What do you do if you don't use SCCM? Can we use the HeadStart collateral if we don't have SCCM? So
there is some tentative work going on to produce an MDT version of the SCCM task sequence. Yeah, we don't have it right this second, but it's been asked by a couple of customers already. So it is something that we're planning on producing. Watch this space. We'll share that as soon as we have something available.
Okay, there's a lot of questions around MDT. Is there any ability to use the same task sequence in MDT, or is there a similar task sequence for MDT being made?
Sorry, John, say that question again.
Sorry, there were the questions around MDT and
right.
If SCCM task sequence could be used in MDT.
No. we'll need to prepare a separate MDT-based task sequence, is the short answer. So yeah, you can't export or import an SCCM task sequence into MDT. It doesn't work like that.
But hopefully it should give people a good guide as to the methodology that's used and the steps that need to happen. So it should be a good starter for 10, I would have thought, from a template perspective.
Yes, I mean, as I say, it's something that we're planning to produce an MDT version of the task sequence. So it's probably easier to wait for that. Yeah, I mean, you won't necessarily be able to view that SCCM task sequence without having SCCM to be able to import it into. So yeah, it's probably easier if we provide the MDT version of it, and then you can just use that directly with MDT. That's probably the easiest way of doing it, I'd say.
Okay. Are the SCCM task sequence scripts or commands for start menu customization available to look at outside of SCCM?
I mean, yes is the short answer. So I think in the guides or the frequently asked questions, part of the material that we've already produced links to the various online docs.microsoft.com pages that explain how to create those. But I guess the easiest way, would be to download the content, the HeadStart content, and inside that HeadStart content, you'll find the necessary XML file that we use, to create to customize that start and taskbar layout. So you can just grab that from inside the HeadStart content and use that as your start point if you want, if that's easier.
What is the minimum version of SCCM required to manage Windows 10?
I mean, it depends what version of Windows 10 specifically, but the 1803 version of Windows 10, the minimum SCCM version, as mentioned, is 1802. But there is a web page that you can visit that will show like a little matrix of which Windows 10 versions are supported by which SCCM versions. But the point is, the two things kind of need to be kept up to date, in line with each other. If you're using the semi-annual channel version of Windows 10, obviously to keep deploying those more up-to-date versions of Windows 10, you need to keep your SCCM environment up to date to be able to support those kind of going forward.
Okay, thank you. How does this relate to the NHS Windows 10 ATP deployment? Can one of the GPOs be configured to enable ATP?
I mean, potentially, yes. We don't have anything natively inside the HeadStart GPOs specifically around ATP, but you could add an additional GPO, into the ordering to configure, ATP according to your environment.
Yep, and just to add to that as well, yes, the ability to onboard your devices through GPO into ATP, I believe that the script should be able to do that. It just needs amending to reflect your organization code or your ODS code. We are using SCCM 1802. Should we update to 1806 ASAP or stick with 1802?
So it really depends, what you want to do in your environment, and obviously it's entirely up to you how you run things. I mean, our Microsoft's recommendation would always ideally be to go to the latest version of SCCM, but since we're releasing updated versions of SCCM regularly, it's perfectly acceptable to skip a version. I mean, I suspect it won't be too long now before the 1810 version is released. So you could quite happily go from 1802 straight to 1810, or maybe even a later SCCM version, depending on how ready and tested things are in your environment. It's really up to you how you manage that. But from our perspective, they always add a huge amount of new features with each SCCM release. So by not upgrading to each of those releases, you're kind of missing out on the improved features that each of those releases brings. But it's perfectly acceptable to skip a version, for SCCM if that's what works best in your environment.
Okay, thank you. Which server OS will the GPO exports work on?
So in terms, in terms of the sort of AD schema requirements, I think the minimum is Server 2008 R2, but it's really more related to the PowerShell version that you've got. So just make sure you're running a recent PowerShell version, when you run that import script. So I'd say, ideally you should be on version 5 of PowerShell in order to take advantage of the way that script works.
Okay. We use Ivanti Management Console. Do you have any templates for this solution?
We don't, is the short answer. What I would suggest that you do in that instance is download the Microsoft security templates, so the security baselines, and then visit the NCSC recommended guidance webpage and have a look at what they are suggesting. And yeah, you need to use what they publish there to produce your own solution, essentially. There's nothing stopping you downloading the HeadStart materials, but you'd have to kind of pick through the contents there and recreate it, I guess, using the Ivanti toolset, because we wouldn't provide guidance on how to do that with third-party tools. But I would imagine potentially if you spoke to Ivanti that they would be able to guide you through that process. And our documents kind of explain how to reconfigure things if you're using SCCM. So hopefully there should be enough for someone who's familiar with Ivanti to kind of make sense of what we're doing, and apply a similar solution using their tools.
Okay. SCCM has been mentioned a lot. Would this be usable with Intune?
So there is actually a separate set of MDM-based policies, NCSE guideline policies, that I think we do publish on our website now. So it would be advisable to have a look at that. I mean, the solution that we've been engaged to assist with is more kind of on-prem type solution, hence the sort of recommendation around the use of SCCM. But yeah, there's nothing stopping you adapting that for use with Intune if that's what you're using.
Thank you. Is MDT integration into SCCM task sequences needed? We're having our NCSE build set up by consultants and don't require MDT bits.
So it is if you're going to import the HeadStart template that we provide, because the templates that we provide were created in an environment that had the MDT integration. So you'll run into issues if you try to import those policies, or rather that task sequence export into an environment that doesn't have the MDT console extensions integrated. So whilst you might not need them in your environment, if you wanted to just take our native template that we've created and import that, you would need MDT integrated to do that.
Thank you. You mentioned MDOP installation for BitLocker. Is this included as part of the NHS Windows 10 Enterprise E5 deal?
Yes.
So can BitLocker be centrally managed using the MDOP tools with no additional licensing other than supplied with the Windows 10 license?
Yes, my understanding is that it is covered by your enterprise agreement.
Okay, and we use VMware Mirage to deploy the OS. Is it possible to use the HeadStart kit with this? I think that's a similar answer, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, obviously our solution is designed to work purely with our tools. It's not to say you couldn't use other solutions, but as mentioned, for the Ivanti sort of style solution, you'll need to kind of I guess, dissect what we've done and, use that in the best way, as you understand how to use, the third-party tool that you're using, in your environment, kind of thing. It's not really something we can kind of give assistance on directly.
Okay, and are there any features for SCCM and Windows 10 missing if the domain functional level is still at 2003?
I think some of the BitLocker and MBAM features are required to have the domain level at 2008 R2. I think that's the main reason we kind of need that at that level.
Thank you. Are the MBAM tools compatible with Server 2008 R2? Just answered that.
Well, in terms of the AD domain level, yes. Yeah, I'm not totally sure if that's still a supported operating system to install new MBAM environments on. I would sort of recommend you should be looking at something a bit newer if you're going to create an MBAM environment, from fresh, as it were.
Okay, and I think we've just come to the end of the questions.
Okay.
If there are any other questions, if anyone wants to just fire them in quickly, we'll ask Greg and the team. So just while we're waiting for those to come in, is it worth just understanding, hopefully it's been explained, but essentially this will provide the Microsoft security baselines, which then the NCSC layers over and above. Do you know what the versions of those Windows OS are set for the different versions? Is it all 1709 or is it 1803?
So the Microsoft security baselines that are currently included in the HeadStart material for NHS are for 1803. The NCSC guidelines are still baselined at 1709 at the moment, and there is a piece of work going on to get those NCSC parts of the HeadStart material updated to 1803. But unfortunately, the NCSC took quite a long time to release their guidance on 1803. I think it was only officially published in the last week or so. They are kind of working on that. In terms of support for 1809, so that the most recent release of Windows 10, the Microsoft security baselines are currently in draft at the moment, and they do exist, but they're still sort of released in draft at the moment. Hopefully they will go to a full release shortly, and then obviously it's then I guess the sort of waiting game for NCSC to release their 1809 guidance, so that we can produce our updated HeadStart GPOs in line with that. One important point to note is that NCSC have always stated on their website that people shouldn't wait necessarily for them to release their updated versions of their guidance for the various releases of Windows 10. So you shouldn't delay using the new version of Windows 10 just because NCSC haven't published specific guidance for that version. Typically what they recommend is just use the previous edition guidance and then keep reviewing that, and as and where they release an updated set of guidance for that new version, just adopt whatever changes they may introduce as part of that. But from experience over the last few releases, typically the guidance between versions doesn't change a huge amount. The things that normally change are kind of related to if there is a new Windows feature that NCSC need to review and then provide some guidance around. But yeah, typically just work with what's available, and as new versions are released of the guidance, look to adopt those once they are released.
Thank you. We've just had a couple of questions come in.
Okay.
One is, is it not best practice not to have so many GPOs applied to one OU? Would it not be better to have one GPO for each type, i.e. customer, NCSE, Microsoft?
So it gives us the opportunity to have a layered approach, but also to segregate what's in those particular policies. So if we wanted to adjust, purely policies related to Internet Explorer, we can, adjust those policies, independently of needing to, adjust the entire set, if that makes sense. So that's the sort of main reason for segregating it the way that we do.
Okay, and we've got one, the custom support agreement expires December 2018. Can you explain that again, please?
Sorry, John, say that again for me.
Sorry, the custom support agreement expires December 2018. Can you explain that again, please?
Yes, so that's basically the agreement between Microsoft and the NHS to provide the support that we're providing, essentially around helping NHS, or the NHS move to Windows 10. So that contract expires at the end of the year. So yeah, if you've got questions, or you're thinking about trialing the HeadStart stuff, do it as soon as you can, so that we can provide assistance and guidance before that contract expires by the end of this year.
Okay, and I think we've come to the end of the questions again, so I don't think there are any more.
Okay, well, shall we call it there then?
Yep. So yeah, rather than keep everyone waiting, if there are any questions, please continue to fire them through. We'll stay on here and we'll just monitor the questions and answers, and we'll respond to them, and we'll publish them as part of the pack that goes out with this webinar.
Okay, great stuff. Thanks, John. And yeah, thanks everyone for listening, and we hope you found it useful.